Well, this is it, fellow travelers. This is the first in what's shaping up to be a very long-running series of videos here on my channel in which I've committed to collecting, reading, and reviewing all 22 books in the REDWALL series by Brian Jacques. It is a series that I started reading way back in my childhood but never ended up finishing. But I plan to do it. I am going to do it now. 2025 is the year when I will hopefully read most of the books. Some of them are really big. We'll have to see about that. But I will be finishing the series. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I will be finishing the series, and I will be reviewing each and every one of these books on the channel. Now, all that said, I am under no illusions that no matter what I do, no matter what I say, no matter how spot on my critiques of this series may be, no matter how good this video ends up being, it can never, ever live up to the sheer quality of literary criticism that is the legendary REDWALL reviews by Mr. Brian Lee Durfee.
What did I think of REDWALL book number 1? Well, gosh, let's talk about. I was majorly confused by everything that was going on. And the book is written for children, and I was baffled by it from the get-go. I was confused, and we'll get into that. They're little monks and knights and fighters and thieves and pirates and whatnot. Lost and confused by the scale of the items, animals, buildings, and everything else within this universe. And it was maddening. And this book didn't help. They're the most confusing books I've ever read in my entire life. And after 3 books, I'm even more confused because I know less about what's going on. There's a big hay cart with a massive-sized horse pulling the hay cart, and it's got 500 warrior rats on it, like a rat army. God, I just couldn't wrap my head around that! What size is the thing? What's the scale ratio to everything in this story? Maybe I just shouldn't be reading books about little animals that talk and wear human clothes. I mean, I was going to some dark places. One of the chapter headings is a mouse or a vole-looking creature digging a tunnel with a shovel. Voles, that's what they dig tunnels. They do it with their hand. They don't need shovels. I'm falling into the realm of I'm breaking up. I'm in over my head here, folks. I'm in over my head. I was contemplating Satanism.
So yeah, we're not going to be addressing any of the size or scale issues in this book. We're not going to be talking about the existence or lack thereof of human civilization in the world of REDWALL. I think Brian covered that pretty extensively in his old videos. And I'm just gonna turn that part of my brain off and just cruise on through the story. This is REDWALL by Brian Jacques. REDWALL is the name of a huge red sandstone abbey built on the fringes of Mossflower Forest. It is a place of peace and tranquility, a sort of central hub where all the different talking animals of Mossflower can gather to share food, drink, and merriment together. Now, one day, that peace and prosperity is threatened when a massive army of rats, ferrets, and weasels, led by an evil rat warlord named Clooney, moves in next door. Clooney intends to take over the abbey and turn it into a fortress from which he can rule the forest and its surrounding area with an iron fist. And so, the formerly peace-loving animals of Mossflower Forest find that they must now band together within the walls of the abbey to protect not just REDWALL, but their very way of life. At the same time, a young mouse named Matthias, who is a journeyman member of REDWALL's monastic order, has taken up a quest to find the legendary Sword of Martin the Warrior, one of the Abbey's founders. He believes that finding this legendary weapon will turn the tide of the battle against Clooney. Of course, this is more easily said than done. After all, Matthias is just one little mouse in a very big world. But can he become more than that? That is the question. I will admit that one of the things that got me really excited about rereading these books was looking at all of the illustrations. The original illustrations for, I want to say like the first 7 or 8 books in the series were done by Jacques, who's one of my favorite fantasy artists. And so he did the map at the beginning of Redwall. So there's Redwall Abbey and its surrounding portion of Mossflower Country and the forest. Very cool. I love the borders that he drew on those. He also drew the chapter headings. All the chapters have these little illustrations in their headings, which lends a lot of personality to this book, I think. Here we got a hedgehog with a coffee mug. It's not actually coffee. I think he's drinking hot vegetable soup in that scene, actually. But I always thought that was funny as a kid. Ooh, here's a poor rat being shot by an arrow as he's trying to climb up one of the abbey walls. Oh, poor guy. He's probably a jerk. He probably deserved it. Here is Mr. Chalk's depiction of the character Basil Staghare, who just appears as a severed head on a shield with the word stealthily underneath it, because he is a very sneaky, stealthy character. But I always thought that little illustration was hilarious. Here's his depiction of Martin the Warrior on the tapestry of Redwall, looking very regal and knightly. Here's Asmodeus the Snake, one of the very important characters in the book. One of the scarier villains of the book, actually. And lastly, in the very last chapter, we get this heading that has a depiction of the Sword of Martin. Kind of reads with ivy vines for some reason. I didn't really get what that was all about. I've never understood why he depicted it that way. But it always reminded me of the Master Sword from Legend of Zelda. How there were some games where you'd find the sword and they would have, flowers and ivy growing all around it. I think the image it reminds me most of is the Legend of Zelda comic that was in Nintendo Power, where it shows the Master Sword with moss growing all over it because it's been so long since anyone's ever used it. I think that's what that reminds me of the most. I know it's not the most mind-blowing thing to talk about with this book, but seeing all those illustrations really brought me back to my childhood. And like I said, it lends a lot of personality to this series. Now, something I was really worried about going into this reread was that I might not like it as much as I liked it when I was a kid. I have not read any of these Redwall books in Lord knows how long, so there was always the possibility that it might not live up to my fond childhood memories. But I was pleasantly surprised that only about a chapter into this book, I was really, really enjoying myself. I felt really sucked into the world and really invested with the characters. And I think this book has aged very, very well. I don't think it's just a good kid's book. I think it's just a darn good book on its own. And I think if you can handle some goofy talking animals and all the nonsense that goes with that, you will enjoy this book. And no matter what age range you are, no matter who you are. I think part of that has to do with Brian Jacques' wonderful writing style. I've mentioned it in some previous videos, but Brian Jacques had a very simple writing style. He could pull off very vivid descriptions using only a few well-placed words, but for the most part, in everything from the prose to the characters to the themes to the world building, it's all very simple. The world building is kind of interesting. There are definitely aspects of the world that could be fleshed out. There's some things that are kind of nebulous in this book that he will flesh out later in the series, though there are some things that still remain pretty iffy. But all in all, the world does a really good job of dragging you in, and he does a good job of explaining how this world works and what the dynamics are between all the different animals. But I think the biggest strength of this book is, in fact, its characters. They are fairly simple characters. Most of them have these very one-note personalities, but I think Brian Jacques hits those one-note personalities so perfectly that they resound very well with the readers. And I think you'll walk away from this book having a favorite character that might be different from my favorite character or different from someone else's favorite character. There's a real diversity of personalities going on in this book. The main character, Matthias, is okay. He starts off as kind of just your ordinary middle-grade fantasy hero, but I think by the end of the story, he's much better. He's a much stronger character at the end. There are other great side characters. There's the aforementioned Basil Staghare, who's this sort of a funny stereotype of an old Imperial English officer. Half of his dialogue ends with the words what, which is very entertaining. There's a character named Formole who is a literal foreman of the moles who live in Mossflower Forest. He's really goofy. I like him a lot. There's the two foxes, Seela and her son Chickenhound, who try to pull a double cross on both Clooney and the animals at Redwall Abbey. Again, there's the snake Asmodeus, who is this sort of secondary villain. He's really creepy. And then there's my favorite character in the whole book, Constance the Badger. Every time Brian Jacques writes a badger into his stories, they're always the best characters. The badgers are always the coolest. They're these sort of gentle giants who, at the drop of a pin, can fly off the handle into this battle rage like Guts from Berserk. It's really, really cool. And I just realized that I'm reviewing a children's book, and I made a reference to Berserk, of all things. What is wrong with me? But in talking about the characters, I do need to address my one big complaint with Redwall. This is the part of the video where I get to tear into one of my childhood favorites. So the main villain of this book is a character named Clooney the Scourge. He is a rat, a sea rat, this sort of mythical figure in the world of Redwall. Some of the animals don't even believe he really exists. He's sort of this figure from their worst nightmares. He's called the God of War, the devil himself. He's built up as being this sort of boogeyman to the creatures of Redwall. And yet, he surrounds himself with absolute morons. The main thrust of the plot of this book is Clooney trying to besiege and take over Redwall Abbey with his army. But all the members of his army are a bunch of idiots. There are many times in the book where both the narrator and Clooney himself refers to his rats and weasels and ferrets as a mob of idiots or an army of incompetents. And that's totally true, because these guys are supposed to be these battle-hardened warriors, and yet they are constantly foiled by the simplest things. They are cowardly. They are constantly tripping over each other. They're constantly squabbling and arguing and getting in fights with one another. They are very disorganized, and Clooney doesn't really even ever take any care to organize his troops. The most discipline that he dishes out is, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to stab you in the chest. That's not really a great way to run your army. And so we have a bunch of incompetent soldiers getting foiled by children, little baby mice and squirrels. There is a scene in this book where they build a siege tower. And through a chain of events involving a hot bowl of soup, this siege tower ends up getting burned to the ground, and dozens of the rats and weasels and ferrets are killed in this burning siege tower. And so, even though Clooney himself is built up to be this legendary, demon-like figure, one of the big bads, one of the most horrible villains who's ever existed in this world, I get the feeling that he's just a really incompetent general. He just has really poor leadership skills, and he's a very poor judge of character because he keeps choosing all these really incompetent, cowardly vermin to fill the rank and file of his army. And so it was really hard for me to take any of the villains, aside from Asmodeus the Snake, who, may I remind you, is absolutely terrifying. It was hard for me to take any of these guys seriously. I do have one minor nitpick that doesn't really apply to the book itself, but rather to the audiobook. I did some immersive reading while rereading Redwall. I had an audiobook playing while I had the physical book open and was reading the words on the pages. And the audiobook that I chose was a fully voice-acted edition. They had a full cast of voice actors playing each of the characters, and they also had a narration by Brian Jacques. So I thought that was awesome. But it ended up being kind of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you have Brian Jacques reading his own book, and that was great. Brian Jacques did an awesome job. He used to read books for a living. It was his job when he worked at the Royal School for the Blind in England to read books to children. And so he has a great reading voice. He has this very strong, old-school Liverpool accent that's very pleasant to listen to. But on the other hand, not all the voice actors are all that great. In fact, some of them are really, really bad. And the worst offender is the guy they picked to play Clooney the Scourge. Not only is he not that great of a voice actor, he took a really weird approach to playing the character. There is a throwaway line at the beginning of the book. I think it's actually in the second chapter where they introduce Clooney for the first time. And the narrator is describing Clooney. He's describing his background, where he comes from. He says how most people don't even really know where Clooney came from. They say that he might have come from some faraway land across the sea. Some say that he is a, quote, Portuguese rat. And so I guess the voice actor took that literally, because when he reads Clooney's lines, he uses this really bad Portuguese accent. I guess that's what it's supposed to be. It's really goofy and over the top, so I'm already having a hard enough time taking this character seriously as a villain, because, like I said, he's kind of an incompetent leader who surrounds himself with incompetent followers. But now he's also being played by a voice actor who just applies this ridiculous, weird accent. And so it was not the most pleasant listening at all times. And so I will say, be careful when choosing an audiobook if you're going to listen to the REDWALL audiobooks. Brian Jake's narration is awesome, but the voice acting is not always the best. But at the end of the day, I am very, very happy with my reread of REDWALL. I thought this book was a ton of fun. And the funny thing is that this one was never my favorite from the series. As a kid, there were a bunch of books in the series that I liked more than the original REDWALL. So I am really excited to get to the rest of those and see how well they hold up. But that's all I have for you guys for now. Let me know in the comments, as always, have you read REDWALL by Brian Jacques? What did you think of it? And whatever the case, I hope you'll join me in my next review when I talk about Mossflower. But until then, as always, farewell and keep reading.
You know, when you talk about heroes, you look at heroes in movies, and to most children, a hero is a gigantic man. It's somebody as big as the Hollywood stars we see. And I think, to a child, a hero could be smaller, because size doesn't matter when it comes to courage and bravery and being a hero. And therefore, I decided that my hero would be a mouse.
I still kind of care about the scale.